Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Skylar.
And today we are discussing Series 4, episode... was it 12? No, 11. Series 4, episode 11, Turn Left, by, once again, Russell T. Davies. Yeah, this episode, huh? It's, yeah.
I felt like
This
this is
episode
what
is
you
depressing.
get. This is what you get when you get a bunch of writing students and they're also doomers, and you also get them really high and tell them to go nuts because doomers wish they could dream up a scenario this bleak. Because holy crap.
Yeah. Like, it's... who boy. Like, I think the thing for me with this story is... It's still, like, RTD, like, hilariously over the... Well, actually, no. In some ways, like, yeah, it's technically, like, ridiculous over the top, but it fits the scale of the stuff that's discussed, and it the way things go make logical sense. Like, I remember reading a review that came out at the same time about how it being like a dig at Britain's attitudes towards immigrants, which is really funny because now we are literally seeing Britain slowly turn more and more fascist in real time.
What are you gonna do?
But yeah, so this episode centers around the entire idea of Donna never meeting the Doctor and how that ripples out through the Whoniverse when the Doctor dies during the events of Runaway Bride instead because Donna is not there. And it really, like, if Midnight was the moment where David Tennant is really able to flex his acting muscles, this is really where Catherine Tate flexes
all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say this episode quickly gets better because when I forgot that at the beginning of it, they're basically in space, Chinatown or Koreatown, or insert generic like Asian aesthetic here.
Yeah.
Especially with the way the fortune teller talks. I'm just like, I forgot about you.
It's very it's Firefly in the sense of like how that has Firefly has a very strong like Asian presence in it. I think probably because, you know, obviously, like, if you look at population density, it makes sense that spreads a lot once like everyone's left the planet. Yeah, it felt kind of like them trying to do a Firefly thing, basically.
I mean, totally possible. I've only seen one episode, but it was something that it was like, okay, you know, it's more creative than what we get now, I guess. Low bar to pass, but yeah, then the episode quickly becomes a virtual masterpiece, a window into an alternate genre, an alternate type of show.
This is
tone.
Yeah. It's easily like, I said Midnight was like the darkest it's ever got, but in some ways I think this might be like bleaker. In the sense of, like, yes, the Midnight Monster isn't defeated and it showed the worst of humanity, but, like, the Doctor still lived, and the whole central point of this episode is that the stuff that happens in this show, if the Doctor wasn't there, the world would be a miserable hellscape.
Yeah, it's the episode I was sort of thinking of during it was basically uh, end of time, sound of drums, all that stuff, with just sort of what happens with the master. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's sort of reminiscent of that, but at the same time, it's a lot bleaker because the master has that sort of just manic energy to him, whereas in this side it's coming from a very human perspective, and so rather than there being like a cartoonish guy at the helm of some wacky hijinks, it's very much just like, no, the world is just going to shit and we don't really have a good explanation for why things just keep happening.
Yeah.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah.
No.
Also, like, it makes me really think about how in comparison to the Tylers, how, like, obviously, like, in comparison to the Tylers and Donna's family, how lacking Martha's family is, because obviously you have Wilf, but I forgot how much this fleshes out and makes Sylvia a character.
Yeah, holy crap.
Yeah, and in some ways I think the rocky relationship that Donna has with Sylvia is very interesting and explored in a compelling way.
There's definitely a lot more here than I remember.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think Catherine Tate and Wilf are definitely like the emotional core. We probably get a little bit of investment from Billie Piper. We'll get to her later, but like,
oh yeah, no, the scene with Wilf, you probably know which one. I won't give it away right now, but you probably know which one was the closest I got to crying since Human Nature.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, that's so.
Also, we'll get. I even liked Sylvia in like one or two scenes, but it still happened, and man, this made me feel for Donna like nothing else, especially knowing what her ultimate fate is, not in this universe, but in the proper one. Just like, damn, you think Jackie Tyler is hard on Rose? You think
yeah.
I hate that I forget her name, but Martha's mom is hard on her? Like, no,
yeah.
God, no, compared to
yeah.
Sylvia.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like the idea of like it's also like the ramifications of how like the little things affect. So like, yes, technically Donna does get a supposedly more stable job with a better pay than what Donna had, but she ends up losing her job when everything gets fucked up when the Rachnos attacks, because the Thames gets shut down, and then London literally gets nuked. And I forgot the fact that they went to Leeds I forgot about the fact that like London has literally gets nuked, and there's literally this like then an ongoing discussion of how literally everyone they know has been vaporized, and they just spend the rest of the episode in Leeds.
Yeah, I
forgot
really
that.
Weird. It's really weird because in my like, for some reason, like I remember most of this episode, but just how different it goes throughout all of it. For some reason, I wasn't consciously aware of it, but I definitely would have placed them in different episodes in my memory if I hadn't like just watched it all as one episode, just because so much happens differently that I would not have remembered like how extreme this plot gets.
Yeah, it's so grounded especially for having like RTD level of continuity with like this insane disaster happening like once or twice every year. It's amazing how they're able to like keep that grounded in like how the country would react, how the world would react, and not to like trash on 12 era, but just the fact that he's like president of the earth, and the whole like how they handle the monks thing with him. It's just it works in some aspects, but it's like you miss out if you do stuff like that, because you can get really good commentary here.
Like, it's honestly like this is the single most like this is supposed to be a kids/family show. Jesus Christ. Like, London is
Jesus,
literally annihilated, wiped off the map.
Yeah, and for most of it, alternate Donna isn't really our, I guess, audience window in the way a companion usually is. Like, it's the hospital is being taken up into the sky, and she's ranting about her job and people fucking around and complaining how she's being fired when other people don't do anything. It's like she's still not there. She's still not, like...
And
we see shades of it. It's not, like, bad writing or anything. It's just, like, she's not fully at the place that she comes to at the very end of this episode when she makes the crucial, like, decision. But yeah, just a lot of small touches like that. Yeah, it really, it grounds it and it pulls it all together, especially the extra cast of like B and C and D list characters, aside from the fortune teller and the hotel worker that points at her back weirdly.
Yeah, and how for being pre-character development, pre-Runaway Bride Donna, there's still, like, the level of development in it that I think is amazing. Like, the level of development in it is great, and it honestly, it makes me further disappointed that Donna's development is completely undone, because she gets this development again in a different way here and becomes a more fully fleshed person, and then just the way that it is done in Journey's End is just the most painful, like, yeah, let's literally just reverse this character back to her worst point.
Yep.
Yep.
Oh yeah, and yeah, so there's I guess to go through it in order, there's the Ragnos thing where the Doctor dies in the Thames flood because he doesn't leave, which I definitely think is interesting because in some ways it reflects on the fact that maybe 10 was like a death seeker after Rose, and Donna kind of gave him something to focus on.
Yeah.
Then after that, Donna gets fired from her job. Well, the Royal Hope is transported to the moon, obviously, in Smith and Jones. There is a throwaway line here that not only Sarah Jane, but the cast of the Sarah Jane Adventures, who are all kids, die in this. Donna gets a raffle ticket to a country house in Christmas when London is literally nuked. They go to Leeds and are basically put in a house with like 7 other people. The US is like, yo, we'll bail you out, and then 60 million Americans are killed by being turned into adipose, which actually there is a plot hole there, because the adipose plan, as mentioned in Doctor Who, was literally to not kill the humans and just kind of siphon off their fat for a little bit, then dip. But whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe someone else got involved. Maybe someone else got involved.
And it also wasn't just.
Yeah, but yeah. The Atmos starts, and Atmos starts, and it is explained that the Torchwood team basically gave up their lives to stop the Sontarans, except for Jack, who has gone to the Sontaran homeworld. I do note that I guess yes. Actually, no. I guess canonically that means that the entirety of Torchwood season 4 takes place before Sontaran. I mean, Torchwood season 2 takes place before Sontarans because they only mention Gwen and Ianto.
Interesting. Yeah, it all lines up.
Also,
well.
Rose repeatedly shows up and is far more interesting than Billie Piper is both before and after this episode. Thanks, RTD.
That was so weird, seeing like an older Rose that was like more like Nine's Rose, but like had obviously gone through with 10. It was just like, okay, can we follow that character, please?
And then we get the terrible fucking shit from the finale where it's like, yeah, let's just give Rose literally everything she ever wanted and override an already perfectly fine ending.
I will say, one thing I like about this is that it avoids the problem, or I guess like the meme with the whole like MCU of whenever there's any individual problem, why aren't other people aside from the main character of this movie helping? It's like, okay, these people tried to help here, but they're not the Doctor, so they freaking died.
So they died.
And barely pulled it off. And they go through each one, and by the end, it's like, there is nobody left, except for the classic companions, but we don't really talk about those. There's everybody in the RTD canon.
Everybody in the RTD verse who is mentioned to have been, is either dead or gone, because Jack can't die, but he's at the Sontaran homeworld.
Yeah. So, crapsack world. If
Plus,
I've ever seen one.
Plus, even with Jack dying, not dying, the reality bomb, which is the real problem here that is mentioned later, of the fact that the stars are going out because they are literally being wiped out by Davros and the Daleks, is not mentioned. So, like, that's, like, even then, like, they couldn't do anything. So, yeah. I like the, like, the scene... The scene with Sylvia where they're in the house, and Sylvia's just kind of literally going through, like, every day I think of someone else who's been completely vaporized, is one of the most, like, effective pieces of writing that Doctor Who has written.
Yeah. My favorite scene with her was, and it's so... I'll give the actress Priscilla props for this, that, like, it's before Donna is really, like, headed out, I think, and deciding to, like, do everything with, like, Rose and stuff, and she's just saying, like, hey, I talked to the military, I'm not qualified. She just, goes on this thing, and her mom is just, like, she's gone. Whether it's, like, mentally or... she's just not in a space, and the one thing that gets her to respond is like, guess I am a disappointment, or something like that, and that's what makes her respond. That was just like, oh my god. Like, wow.
Yeah. And then the part where Rose, like, tries to tell Donna that Donna's special, and, like, just how Donna responds and is just like, no. Like, it really, like, it's also an interesting character study on who Donna is, in a way that I don't think I ever really appreciated before.
She's like, absolutely crushed.
Yeah.
She never met 10. She never had that spark.
Yeah. She never breaks out of the capitalist lower mid-class hellscape she's in.
Yeah.
She's like a disenfranchised millennial. Well, not a millennial, a Gen Xer.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really extraneous, but I never understand the age composition of Donna's family. Because, like, Donna's like 40. So, like...
hold on. No. late 30s. She's about my dad's age. So
See,
actually, wait. Actually, no. She would have been exactly 40. So like 39, 40. Yeah, okay. I
Yeah.
think to be fair, Wilf wasn't originally intended to be on
Yeah, I know, but I'm just
in
saying
Donna's family.
that means Wilf is at least 80, and he does.
I mean, okay, Wilf was old enough to have served in World War II.
Yeah.
So, which means that he had to have been born before like 19, like he would have to have been born in like the 20s, maybe the 30s. And Bernard Cribbins is Bernard Cribbins is 91 and was born in 1928, so
Yeah.
it could conceivably line up.
Yeah, if Sylvia was like late teens, early mid 20s, like it works.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. And then we get the scene where it is revealed that England is building labor camps for the immigrants because they can't send them home, which leads to the most like I've helped maintain the thought for a while that like aside from like Peter Capaldi and Christopher Eccleston, Bernard Cribbins is the best actor the show has ever had.
Yeah.
Like,
Top 5.
like how completely crushed he is by you can just tell the realization of like what he put his life on the line for all those years ago was for nothing.
Yeah, that scene broke me. I forgot about it, and there are very few things that get to me in fiction, but yeah, that did it.
Yeah.
So you have Rocco, and he's just this powerful character because he's very much comes across as sort of this like boisterous immigrant man stereotype who like they come in and he's loud and large life and he has a large family and they're all crammed in together, haha. But like the joke is the entitled white people now have to do the same thing. Well, I think they're white too, or I think they're Italian, I'm not sure.
Yeah. But still, the point is that they are not English.
They're not English. They're the immigrants, and so they're all crammed in. But now the English have to be there too. Ah, so spooky. And then you sort of there's a lot of commentary there because you sort of get the impression like, oh yeah, the immigrants, they're used to this. Like of course they're happy with it. And so he's sort of playing into that sort of stereotype. But then you get the moment with him and Wilf sort of saying goodbye as they're taking them off to the quote unquote labor camps. And Donna sort of starts to see through it and she's like, well, what do you mean labor camps? There's no jobs. And he's like, oh, we're going to do sewing or like whatever. And he's still like at that moment trying to keep it up. But then he has the salute with Wilf and there are just no words and you just see the expression like drain from his face.
Yeah.
And then you see, it cuts away to Wilf and Donna talking, then it cuts back and it's him just looking distraught, holding his kid, and it's just that moment of realization that like, no, of course he wasn't fucking happy living with 12 people in a tiny ass fucking house. It was how he coped with it, and there's just there's that powerful realization obviously in that moment of who he is as a person, but also just that powerful commentary on like immigration issues as a whole that like, no, of course they don't actually enjoy living like that. It's dehumanizing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also like I read something that was making an interesting point of how while Wilf and Sylvia and Donna aren't necessarily like the people who would, they are the demographic of the people who would maybe read the Daily Mail or the Sun or something with like that kind of anti-immigrant sentiment, and then they themselves are forced to be in that same situation. And then and then with it then being turned on its head in that scene, like it's a really powerful part of the episode.
And it doesn't feel like a Doctor Who episode. It doesn't. Yeah. This isn't like sci-fi fascists just doing that. In that moment, I forgot, until Rose was there and the fact that Donna's there. Like, if it weren't for that, this would be, and it still is, terrifying and horrifying, especially because there are people today, both in Britain and here and elsewhere, who would be completely fine with that and would advocate for that. Yeah. It was... Yeah. It's strong commentary when it can work outside of the genre that it's labeled as.
Yeah. I also like the foreshadowing throughout the episode of everyone like noticing that there's something off, or like there's something on Donna's back and not knowing what it is or being able to mention it. Until it is eventually shown that it's the Beetle that basically hijacked the whole timeline by having her turn right instead of left. And I also like how Donna freaks out after that, because it's like that it like how like she immediately pivots to like, okay, so therefore it's not me that's special, it's just because I have this.
I will say some of the actors don't. A lot of the side actors in this episode are great. Like, they're not there for long. They do their job and they, like, get out. But, like, some of the early characters, like the woman, her friend in, like, the red dress, I think, who's like, there's something on your back, and then, like, runs away. I was just like, okay, that could have been done better. Yeah. But, like, the good thing is when it gets, like, serious time and it's Rose and Unit and that one dumbass soldier in the Leeds neighborhood that are doing it, it's much more effective there, because we've lost like all pretense of this is a sci-fi family show. But in the very beginning, it's kind of like they don't play to it as well, at least in my opinion. But that's like, again, it's like a very small nitpick. It's effectively foreshadowed throughout.
Yeah. And then there's the like gut punch ending where it's like literally to write the timeline, Donna has to kill herself and cause a traffic jam. It's not even like kills herself to like undo the focal point. It's literally to like do the it's literally just to cause a traffic jam to make Donna turn left. And then after that, there's the, like Rose is back, like she told me to tell you, Bad Wolf. And then it's really weird how that makes everything say, like, they never talk about why that makes everything say Bad Wolf. Like, it's kind of just like a haha cliffhanger shot.
Yeah.
It's the rule of suspense.
Yeah.
It doesn't make much sense, but Doctor Who, Bad Wolf.
Yeah. So yeah, and that leaves us on the cliffhanger until next week. Anything else before ratings?
I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess like it feels like a lot of things that I could say about last week I could say about this week too, in terms of regards to acting and how it uses stuff. However, like, well, last week was a bottle episode that's very sort of tense and claustrophobic, this one has it's darker. It's even more horrifying because of its scale and how it ties back together basically the entirety of the past 2 years of the show in just 45 minutes. And it's really like it this is like it's the level of like I don't think RTD could have written Heaven Sent, but at the same time I don't think Moffat or Chibnall could have written an episode like this or an episode like Midnight. Like there is something about how well RTD is able to both pick fantastic actors and then like grasp like this level of emotionality and empathy in his scripts that I don't necessarily get from other Doctor Who. Like there's something about like his style in particular that, but then again, that might just be my RTD bias because you know it's where I started and I have the big nostalgia for it. But yeah, so yeah, like I'd absolutely give it an A plus, 10 out of 10 rating. I'm still not entirely sure as to where it stands. Like, I'm not sure where it stands up next to Midnight, but I at least know that it's on its tier level, if not better.
Completely agreed. This handles, well, okay, sort of starting over. I like to say that like something is really good when the story material, when the characterization, even when the plot like transcends the trappings of the genre, the aesthetics of the genre that it is, and this episode totally does that. You kind of whittle away all the fantastic, wondrous elements of Doctor Who, starting with the Doctor, and then slowly you're working your way through all of RTD canon, in a very effective way. I don't think you could do an episode like this. Like if you did, I don't fucking know. Like if this happened with Clara, it would be like a jumbled mess. Like where do you go in the canon, in the timeline for that? I think this is like this was the best moment to do this because as we know, the Tennant era was basically about to end. So it's perfect in that sort of way. Catherine Tate is on point. Wilf is on point. Billie Piper delivers arguably her best performance as Rose post series 1.
Yeah.
So that's cool. And looking it up, just like with the political stuff, like even stuff like the Zygon invasion and the Zygon inversion, which could also be like considered a commentary about immigration and, you know, people infiltrating the system or not infiltrating the system or just wanting a better life. Like even that, it's done with a very heavy sci-fi tint, which, you know, can work, and I don't begrudge people using sci-fi for commentary, but this just does it in such a great way. You forget that you're watching Doctor Who, which is that's a feat. That's a damn impressive feat. So yeah, I wouldn't know where to put this, like below or above Midnight, how those two cash out. All I know is that it continues the largely consistent trend of Series 4 being an absolute banger. A plus.
High momentum, yeah.
Yeah. I would say, you know, Midnight is very much an episode of the Doctor's weakness.
Yeah.
And this is very much an episode of Donna's weakness.
Yeah.
And both of these episodes are sort of about pushing the two characters to their limits in their own ways and showing how weak they are without each other. I mean, pretty much, yeah. It's basically about, like, you've seen them together for this whole season and seen how well they act together. Like, now let's remember how they would be apart and just showing how much they fail. And in that sense, I would like almost consider this like a two-parter in some sense, not in like a continuity sense, but in like a sort of spiritual sense. I would consider these two episodes to be paired. Um,
Yeah, definitely.
and just what it sounds like is like I can't think of any other time in the series when there are two separate stories that are just both so fantastic right
Linked
next to
in
each
that
other.
way, yeah.
Like linked in that way, but also just two separate stories that are fantastic, one right after the other. Like I don't know of any other pairing of tens like that.
Yeah.
Um, it's just astounding. Um,
Yeah.
Midnight was already like just such a brilliant episode that really just pushed the acting and characters of the show, and then and like I almost want to say like the acting in this episode is better. Um, I think
Yeah.
there was so much good acting in Midnight, but like this episode just pushes it so much further. Just with the emotionality of it and the complexity of the emotions and range we get across like these various times. And if I had to say where Midnight is better, I think definitely the plot is slightly better, which isn't to rag on the plot of Turn Left at all, but it's just yeah, I think both of them excel in a different area, and both of them just complement who they're exploring so well, and just 10 out of 10. Yes, it's amazing. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Very much so. Um yeah. All right. Next week we shall be discussing series 4 episodes 12 and 13, The Stolen Earth and Journey's End. Um until then, it's time to move on to our next segment, and that's probably the last time we're gonna do the next segment like that. But yeah. All right. Today we are discussing Series 2, Episodes 12 and 13, Fragments and Exit Wounds. This is the sort of two-part, at least thematically linked, finale for Series 2 and the final appearances of Tosh and Owen in the show. I think we're all sort of in agreement that, like, one is significantly better than the other. Fragments is sort of like a flashback episode where it shows how, like, the team came to work for Torchwood except for Gwen and Susie. Although, like, I think my main thing with this episode is I think it would have worked better if it wasn't the episode right before 2 out of the 4 members getting flashbacks in this episode fucking croak. Like, it's kind of like a little bit too little too late in some ways.
Yeah.
Like it's still like I still think it's a really like good episode that has a lot of like interesting character beats, but still it's kind of like, you know.
I also don't know why they did the whole it has to be a bomb thing, because you could just like none of them die here. I guess it warns them that there's like a threat coming, but then like
yeah,
the threat is a red herring anyway, so it's like
they're going for is like, ooh, it's a threat.
I guess
Yeah.
to inflate the tension.
it's jank.
I don't know. I certainly liked
jank.
it more than the second half. We get I'm always for fleshing out characters more and seeing how Jack joins Torchwood to begin with. Like, if anything, that was a good puzzle piece to fill in.
Yeah. Very interesting sort of part of the story there. Yeah, and it's like it's like there's really good story stuff, and like Owen is especially like really great here. You get like kind of like the thing of like, oh, like you kind of understand like how he got like completely broke, and you get a sense of what Torchwood was like in like pre-Jack in like the 1800s, and how like it's very clear even from the start that he's disgusted by like their brand of nationalism.
White women at it again for King and Country.
Yeah, I was waiting for that one.
Also, is this
Wait a second, but Jack's not a dog.
Oh, does the previous head of Torchwood 3 kill all of Torchwood 3 and himself except Jack because of the events of the Doctor Who film?
No, it's supposed to be, I believe it's mentioned more in supplementary material, where like some force or whatever showed him like a vision of the future of like the 21st century, and he couldn't handle it. So
and then he says the Torchwood opening thing. Oh.
Well, technically that's Jack's thing, but yeah, and I think that's supposed to be something that Jack has been saying for a long time, of like, guys,
that's a Chibnall line.
It's coming, you gotta be ready, guys.
The 21st century is when everything changes,
and you have to be ready, guys.
Yeah, that was the dorkiest fucking roll credits scene.
I mean, I think it is sort of like a chilling reprise of like how it's used in that context.
It didn't get me. It didn't get me at all.
Fair enough.
It was funny as fuck to me. It was just the 21st century is when everything changes.
I can see that.
It was just, it didn't get me.
What was I gonna say? I definitely think like, it's a good story, and then also like, you know, the stuff that Ianto has with Jack is cute. It's a little bit less cute when you realize that it's because he wanted to hide his like half cyber converted girlfriend in Jack's basement, but you know.
Baby steps.
It's still kind of cute.
The most chilling for me, well, it's kind of weird. The most like
Tosh's
like implications.
It's like it's honestly like it's really interesting how RTD portrays UNIT compared to like all the other New Who portrayals of UNIT. They're run by the like it's very interesting because like RTD is kind of like the only person who sort of, I guess the way to put it is the only person who sort of like examined the implications of the war on terror when it came to UNIT, of like the implications of like what that would have made UNIT.
Yeah, I will admit, this is a confession that's going to surprise no one. I've kind of been a lib for UNIT. I've been like, okay, they're not as bad as like the cops, but no, yeah, they're probably actually worse.
Yeah, especially if they're an arm of the
argument
United
that
Nations,
like you shouldn't really do that to UNIT because that's what Torchwood is most likely. But like if UNIT is an arm of the government, it's going to be used to that effect probably anyways. Yeah, that's true. I forget the UN part, honestly. But yeah, it's especially paired with Turn Left. It was interesting seeing that, like, not only is, like, potential disaster Earth UNIT and the rest of English government fascist, but, like, current Earth UNIT is fascist. And for a woman who was being blackmailed and being threatened for her mother to be, like, killed or kidnapped or something like that. Like, they do that to that woman? Like, really? It was chilling, to say the least, to see Tosh that broken.
Yeah. And yeah, it's like, it's very, like, interesting sort of, like, unsubtle commentary of, like, yeah. It's very interesting because, as I said, I think that the I really do think that like it's a very unique perspective on Unit that we haven't gotten since. Like Chibnall just like dodged the bullet of having to deal with Unit at all by like taking them out. And like Moffat's Unit was very like modernized version of the 70s Unit where it's like, yeah, okay, they're the good guys. And it's like between this and Poison Sky, like the way that RTD portrayed Unit was very different and kind of an interesting, unique perspective. Yeah, very based.
Yeah. I don't hate what Moffat does to it, but at the same time it's very much like a device and organization of convenience where it's like, oh, we need people on Earth that also know about aliens. Here you go. Here's some Lethbridge fan service. Here's this quirky, nerdy girl.
Lethbridge Stewart's daughter. Yay.
Like, I'm not mad about it. It's just like, okay. Is that it?
Yeah.
Until the 50th
definitely.
and that one Zygon two-parter, but then that's it?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there is also the interesting thing of like, I think like it's mentioned like, oh yeah, like it's like Lethbridge, like they actually, yeah, they do mention Lethbridge Stewart in Poison Sky, and it's like, oh yeah, he's in fucking Peru or whatever. And it's very interesting because Nicholas Courtney died and never appeared on screen in Doctor Who again, at least outside of that one thing in the Series 8 finale. It's a very sort of, it's an interesting thought because you never really see what his thoughts on the modern Unit were. And it's interesting because as a character, he's very much like not with that kind of post-War on Terror shit, at least. I don't think he would be. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and then so after all the they get all pulled out of this building that explodes and miraculously manages to not kill all of them. It's revealed that John Hart was the one who blew up the building, and he has Jack's brother, Gray, which brings us into the next episode, which is significantly worse. Now, I will start by saying that I don't think it's as disappointing as the Series 1 finale. However, that doesn't make it good.
It sucks.
The pacing is borked, and Gray really should have showed up more or like had more of a presence in the two-parter if they wanted to like establish him as an actual threat.
And
because
a better
as
actor.
it stands, Gray's just kind of like, huh, okay.
He needed a better actor. I'm sorry. It's just like people say Anakin Skywalker has no emotion in his voice. Like,
yeah,
I'm sorry, Hayden Christensen.
especially considering what like Gray is supposed to have gone through. Like, it's just kind of like,
Yeah, I don't want to shill for every white unbased male anarchist's fanboy is the Joker. I don't want to shill for him, but like
gamers rise up.
Facts. There's no sense that anything has happened to him. I said this in the group chat beforehand. I get more emotion hearing what happened to Gray from Jack talking about it, because John Barrowman, duh, and from John talking about it.
Yeah.
But nothing from him indicates, like, aside from a goofy brand that looks like a badly done tattoo on his face, there's nothing to indicate that he's gone through anything except that he says he has and that he hates Jack. Like, John Barrowman is doing 100% of the selling that he is absolutely being torn up inside by seeing his brother this way. Like,
Yeah.
he's doing all the work, and
Yeah, no,
it's not bad.
like, yeah,
You just
John
don't get
Barrowman's like
any
pulling
else.
all the work there. Yeah, definitely.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's jank. It's super jank. And like it's also at the point where like the way it leads to the point that like the other shit is kind of busted too.
Yeah.
Where like the pacing is so weird because of like when Gray is dealt with. Like, while I think in some respects having, well, I think like it's supposed to be that like the stuff with Tosh and Owen is happening simultaneously while Jack is subduing Gray. The way that they are put together in the episode, which because I think it makes sense that they didn't want to cut away from that like dual death scene. Well, yeah, like, well, it makes sense that they didn't want to cut away from that, and I think that that's a good thing because it is, like, the best scene in the episode and a genuinely impactful scene and, like, one where the acting is actually firing on all cylinders. It feels like because it all happens after Gray has been dealt with, it feels like Jack and Reese and Gwen and Ianto are just kind of standing around or like wandering around in the tunnels in the hub when they like don't know like what happened to Tosh or Owen.
Yeah, it's a compound problem because you have the absolute lack of character that is Gray, the seed from which all Chibnall era characters have blossomed. You have him, and it's just like, okay, how is he able to put one over on John Hart and basically make that man, that incredibly difficult to control man, basically his slave for like the duration of this thing? Why does he
there's
kill
never
Tosh?
really anything to set up like well, I mean, because I mean, to be fair, the Tosh thing was because I think he figured out that he was trying to stop the power plant thing.
Sure, but it's also like the way he says it is just like, how is it to die? Like, I forget the dialogue because it's stupid and he does it badly. But it's like, it's just, again, it's like the whole like I'm an anarchist or nihilist or Hollywood thing and nothing matters, but I'm still doing all this shit because fuck you, you hurt me. But like amateur hour. So it's just like everything topples because the foundation is not solid at all. And the only thing that saves what happens to Tosh and Owen is the fact that those actors pour themselves into it. That Owen is screaming and that he instantly stops as soon as Tosh is sobbing. Like that just like
that. Yeah, that's a really powerful scene. It's just, and again, it is like the powerfulness of that scene is still just ever so slightly undercut by the fact that the editing in like the pacing of it is kind of borked, so it feels like Jack and Gwen and Ianto could have at least arrived in time to save Tosh, but not Owen, obviously, but like still could have arrived in time to save Tosh. And it's just like, yeah, Tosh is slowly dying of a gunshot wound. Where the fuck is everybody else? And again, it's very clear that this supposed to be happening simultaneously, but because they're not cutting back and forth because they want that sort of uninterrupted scene for it, it feels off.
Yeah. And the sad part is that, like, the only people who are untainted by this really are people that, like, live. Like, Gwen mostly goes through a fine thing. What's his name? Reese. I can't believe I forgot.
Yeah.
He's literally the name of our Discord channel. Reese is awesome.
Reese Stands Incorporated.
John Hart, of all people, gets, like, a little bit more depth.
Yeah.
And by the end, I was actually like, huh, I hope
John Hart is a really interesting character, actually.
Yeah, it's just there was nothing about Gray that had any substance.
Yeah, Gray is Like, and I see, like, I can at least see, like, the potential in Gray, but it's not set up enough. And it really needed to be set up more for it to, like, work anywhere near, like, what they were trying to do. Yeah, like, it's just, like, again, like, like the entire episode was going like kind of like yeah, this is kind of jank, and then it got to that last scene with Owen and Tosh, and it's just like, holy shit, this was like kind of the emotionality that I wish the whole episode could have had. But like as it stands, like on the whole, like Fragments, I guess, is like a solid like B plus 8 out of 10, and then Exit Wounds is like a C minus. And it's really sad because for an episode that features the death of not one but two major characters, I really feel like they could have done better than this.
Yeah, I'd echo basically everything about that. Fragments is by far the superior half of this two-parter, mostly because it's, you know, characterization, and like some good backstory. Even if it's like a little bit too little too late, it's still there and they still bothered, so that's good. That's like a solid B plus. And then yeah, just everything falls apart because you don't buy Gray or any of his motivations. Once you get, like, the most interesting fact about him...
Gray just sucks, man.
What? Yeah. Yeah, the most interesting thing about him is that he's got John Hart working for him, and that's not a good sign. So it's, you know...
Yeah. Like, I mentioned it felt like they wanted... It felt like John Hart, like, yeah, they set up the Gray thing, but the way the Gray thing is written feels like they either A, wanted to go a little bit into more in depth with Gray and just didn't have the ability to, or they expected for John Hart to, like, they started writing it with the assumption of like, oh, John Hart's going to be like the main villain for the end of it, but then they realized like, oh, this would just be petty. And I will say, actually, the thing that I do like about Exit Wounds is the setup where like you think it's John and you're like, what? And even Jack is like, wow, that's really petty, bro.
I feel like,
but yeah, no, like John Hart's really good
I felt
here.
Like Gray should have been like another season, because then you could really dive into like what makes him tick or like what's not ticking, if we're being blunt. But yeah, so that was just that was sad. It ends on a high note because of the acting, and then I got sad because I remembered that Mickey and Martha aren't going to be. So yeah, that's a C minus from me, fam.
Yeah, the first, I mean, I don't really have much more to say. The first one was good and fun, and I liked it, and it did interesting things, 8 out of 10. The second one did not do those things, 5 out of 10.
Yeah. So yeah, this is the end of our Torchwood segment as it stands for now. We will be covering Children of Earth as its own special episode, and I guess like the possibility is we might like double book something in of like, say, I don't know, if there's like an animated episode like Dreamland or something like Ten's appearance on the Sarah Jane Adventures, where it's like, yeah, okay, we'd be like down to double book that with something. But until then, that's probably the end of our sort of secondary segment on the show as we sort of go back to just covering Doctor Who full time. So nothing new next week. We'll probably have the Children of Earth episode coming out in like about a month or so. Right now I have it planned to do it after Waters of Mars. Because I think that makes the most sense, because that's when Ten's trying to, ignore manning the fuck up and acknowledging that he's about to die. But yeah, until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod. You can also support us on Patreon for perks like early access to episodes, the ability to listen in live to recordings of the podcast, and potentially the ability to even guest star on an episode of your choosing. Until then, I'm Jeff. You can find me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I'm secretly related to Jack, and I have no character. You can find me on Twitter at skyhigh9_5.
I'm eating chicken tendies and quixotic queries at twitter.com.
And we will see you all next week.